Hello. Alright, so my first video ran out of time, so we're going to have to move to a part two, but that's okay. So, looking at these two passages here, what I want us to think about is, when we talk about the Bible as mythology, um, what are some of the purposes that the stories of mythology serve? And one of those, of course, is that they help us to kind of understand how the world works, why things are the way that they are. These are questions that people have asked ever since the dawn of time, um, which is, again, how do things come to be the way that they are? There is a specific name for these types of stories. The French call them pourquoi tales. That's not you'll need to know, but the Bible definitely contains a lot of pourquoi tales in the sense that it is used just like all mythology to kind of explain why things are the way that they are. So looking at these two passages here, I'll just leave them up for a minute and you see if you can guess, first of all, which story they come from and what they are meant to explain. All right, so the first example, cursed be you of all cattle and beasts in the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust shall you eat all the days of your life. Enmity will I set between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. He will boot your head, and you will bite his heel. All right, so think about where that story comes from and what it's pertaining to and what it's meant to explain. And I'll give you a second to think about that. And then let's look at the one on the right. I will terribly sharpen your birth pangs, in pain shall you bear children. And for your man shall be your longing, and he shall rule over you. All right, so I'll give you a minute to think about that one. Now, if we go back to the quote on the left here, if you guessed that this is from the Adam and Eve story, you would be right. And what is it pertaining to? This is God addressing the serpent, which again was the creature that Satan chose to use as his vessel to corrupt Adam and Eve and to introduce the idea of original sin. So, because of this, God curses the snake, the serpent, to have to crawl on its belly from here on out, right? The snake has lost use of its legs, so it is a creature cursed to have to crawl forevermore. And simply put, what is that explaining, right? Why snake has no legs, why the snake must crawl on the ground. And then this one, this is also from the Adam and Eve story. What is it pertaining to? Well, remember, which of Adam and Eve, which one did Satan approach first? It was Eve, right? So Eve is the one who initially gets deceived by the serpent, and she is the one who convinces Adam to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So she, whether fairly or not, according to the biblical teachings, she bears the brunt of God's punishment in this. So for Eve's role in original sin, she is cursed with childbirth. Her body will have to be used to bring forth children. She's going to experience pain. Women are going to have to experience biological pain and discomfort, with things that men will not have to endure. Childbirth, menstruation, menopause, all of those things that sort of wreak havoc on women's bodies and create pain and discomfort for us. And then part of her punishment as well is that she will be subservient to her husband. That was not God's original plan. God's original plan was that Adam and Eve would be as equals, that men and women would walk together. But again, according to the biblical teachings, as a result of original sin, women were expected to be subservient to their husbands. And the sad part about it, of course, is right or wrong, this biblical passage was used for centuries to justify the idea that women were the property of men. All right, so moving to the Cain and Abel story, what are some key points and some takeaways from this story? The Bible teaches us, of course, that Cain and Abel are the two offspring of Adam and Eve. They are the firstborn of Adam and Eve. Cain first, and then his brother Abel. Abel becomes the favored child by God and by his parents, for reasons that are a little bit not well explained. Cain cannot seem to find favor either with his parents or with God, partly because one of the things that the scripture teaches us is that Cain he's very inquisitive. He's not someone who just kind of goes along with whatever he's told. Cain questions things. And one of the things that the Hebrew God is very big on is that blind obedience. That sort of, you do what I say and don't question why I tell you to do it, kind of thing. Cain was questioning everything. Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to pray? Why do we, and when it came to the sacrifices that God was asking, Cain was like, well, why does God have to have blood? Why does God have to have the lamb? Why can't God be content with one of my melons, for example? And so when it comes time to make the offering, Cain offers the fruit of his hands, which, he's a farmer, whereas his brother Abel is a shepherd. I think maybe there's a part of Cain that genuinely believes maybe he's doing a good thing by offering God the fruit that he's produced, but God is not happy with that. That's not what appeases God, right? So it's Abel who actually brings the gift of the lamb. And of course, this pleases God, which then incites the wrath of Cain, who is, he's very angry and jealous at that point. And the story makes it look like, I think to some extent, that this was like some hair trigger reaction on Cain's part. It wasn't that. This resentment had been festering in Cain for his entire life. And so he and his brother fight, and in the course of that fight, his brother is killed. Now, also the story's a little bit murky about whether this was premeditated murder or was it just kind of murder in the heat of the moment? Is it what we would call today second-degree murder? There's a little ambiguity about that, but I think what we can agree on is that the end result is the same, which is that now Abel is dead and Cain must deal with the repercussions of that. And of course, God comes looking at him and asks him, where is your brother? And he delivers the famous line, am I not my brother's keeper? Well, God, of course, knows what has happened. But here's what I want you to think about. This will be our critical thinking discussion. And this will be one of the questions I will raise to you for your assignment for this. We are told that God places a mark upon Cain before he banishes him forever. Cain, part of his punishment is that he must wander the earth for the rest of his life. But he worries that people will try to harm him because of his brother's death. So God puts a mark on Cain so that no harm can come to him. No one can kill him. No one can slay him as long as that mark. But is that mark a blessing from God, or is it part of his punishment? Is it a curse from God? Again, I'm not going to answer that for you because that's something that I want you to think about. Right, so just keep that in mind. It will be one of your discussion questions for this module. Noah and the flood. I think, again, a key concept that comes from this story is this is where we get the idea of the covenant. God gets so angry that he decides to destroy the entire world, everything that he's created, and just start over with a new race that will be built from the descendants of Noah. One thing that stands out to me in this story is that, and this is something I always try to impart to my students, it is probably the closest we get in the Old Testament to an actual apology from God. And it is where we see the Old Testament God actually contemplating the fact that he made a mistake in creating human beings. So in essence, this is God admitting that he made a mistake, that there was a flaw in our design, that we are inherently evil, but if that is so, that must go back to a mistake on his part in his creation. In other words, he says human beings cannot help the way that they are. They are what I made them. And this is at the root of God's apology in that story. And so he sends the rainbow to signify the idea of the covenant, right? That he will never again destroy the earth by flood. And then last for this section, we get the story of Abraham and Isaac. The story is really a quite simple one. God tests the faith of Abraham by asking him to sacrifice his son. Now, we know the Old Testament God was notorious for this, so that's why Abraham has every reason to believe, right, that this could be a possibility. And it's only at the last minute, when he's made that heart-wrenching decision to sacrifice his son, that the angel comes down and tells him it was only a test of his obedience. Right, but again, why Abraham believes that, I think is the essence of what we need to take away from that. All right, so you're going to have some discussion questions to think about with this module. I'm going to have to